Plateau. Your business isn't moving backwards, but it isn't moving forward either. It's better to be hot or cold than lukewarm, it's been said. How do we as a business move past this stagnant place where we find ourselves? In episode 4, we unpack the building blocks of how high performance teams, helping you know where to start to take your team to the next level. This season, we're unpacking the tools you need to effectively connect and collaborate with your team. Are you ready to build your personal toolbox? All that and more right now on the New Generation Leader on IBGR Profit Radio to start, grow, and exit your business. You're listening to the IBGR Network International Business Growth Radio. We are live across North America and around the world. Good afternoon, Toronto. This is Thursday, October 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And one of the beautiful aspects of IBGR is that we are live around the world 24 hours a day in each market segment. And you have an opportunity throughout the day to hear from business leaders in regions around the world. So right now, here in North America, we are live in the middle of the workday. But you could listen in the morning, you could listen in the evening, and you can go back anytime and catch up on podcasts across all sectors, across all the regions of the world, and learn something new, find somebody, a new interesting voice to learn from across marketing, finance, operations, and passing your business off to the next level. Perhaps one day selling it. So today on the New Generation Leader, we are talking about high performance expectations, how you lay out with your employees and your staff and everyone you are working with the expectations of how to grow and build your business. So as we are exploring this today, one of the key challenges that I think business leaders are finding themselves with right now, and we will continue to see come to fruition in the months and years to come, is how do we do more with less? How can we appropriately motivate our team, our staff to perform on the job, to not only find fulfillment for themselves personally, but also to reach our business goals? So as we talk about this today, we're going to talk about the ingredients of performance and high performance, what high performance means. And truthfully, it starts with us. It starts with each of us as individuals beginning to understand ourselves. And we're going to come back to that in a little bit, but I want to take a look at where we most often find ourselves trying to solve this problem. Imagine this scenario. I see this with clients all the time. We have a problem. What's the problem? A team is missing their mark. A team is not performing to expectations. They're missing deadlines. There's lots of mistakes. The list could go on of what these possible challenges could be that this team is facing. And it finally comes across our desk. We're wrestling with it. How do we solve this problem? Our knee-jerk reaction, some of my friends say with laughable predictability, we jump to two steps. We reorganize, we realign, we change how the team and the organization are structured. As we think naturally, if there's a problem, certainly if we reorganize, we can reorganize this problem away. I can't tell you how many times I have watched organizations attempt to solve a challenge by publishing a new staff organizational chart. If we change who's reporting to who, then naturally it will just improve on its own. And then once we change that alignment, change that organizational structure, then we attempt to start executing again. Alignment and execution, alignment, execution. And we swing back and forth on this pendulum. And if you go online to our show notes, you'll see we'll talk about this tool throughout the show today, how to maximize team performance. But if you look at this image and you imagine swinging a pendulum back and forth between alignment and execution, you just keep moving back and forth. We'll come back to the rest of that image later on in the show as we talk about high performance expectations. But if that's where we go with laughable predictability, we're selling ourselves short. We're not truly impacting the root cause, the real problem in this situation. So how do we overcome this? How do we move past this? Well, I want to continue pressing in right now on the problem before we get to the solution. So we're going to talk about high performance, and a high performing team that's doing more with less is ultimately going to get to where they are building capacity. But in order to build capacity, you have to have influence. And influence is a key part of next week's show as we talk about building influence with our customer base and continuing to form influence, not just transactional relationships with our customers, but truly building influence. But if we're not increasing in our capacity, what is the problem? I've quoted these statistics a few times, and I'm going to quote them again because they're so important for us to understand and get a pulse on where we are in our world, in our workplace, in the business world right now. Where do we tend to go? And the tendencies are pretty clear. The tendency is, according to this study on Workplace 2020, only 50% of employees have clear expectations. How do you get an expectation across to your employee? Well, you tell them, you talk to them, you have a conversation, you are in communication with them. So is communication breaking down, or does communication even exist? Last week, we talked about how to build up that one-to-one relationship with your team to maximize your team influence as you are working with and leading employees on your staff. So if you missed last week's show, go back. There's some impactful tools and some frameworks that you can use and try out to find the best way for you to have those one-to-one relationships. But if those relationships are lacking, then expectations will not be clear because we're not communicating them. And that is why half of employees in the workforce don't have clear expectations. So let's take a look at the second one. Only 34% of employees believe their manager knows what's happening in their job. Now, if you're the business owner, you're the business leader, don't you think you should know what's going on? Don't you think you should have a pulse? And there is a time factor to this. How is it that we get to a place where managers don't know what employees are doing? Is there a busyness factor, an efficiency factor, that we're not able to have those one-to-one conversations? We're not able to build in that rhythm? Or are we wasting time? Are we wasting time in an environment with maybe some drama and two individuals in the team just aren't getting along, or there's some hostility between team members? Maybe there's some misalignment. We talked about alignment and how we get to that. That's just one piece. That's not the only piece. Or maybe there's missed targets, and we keep going through this cycle of missing our targets. If we get stuck not knowing what's going on, though, we're going to end up stuck in this plateau. And the plateau can only last for so long before it starts to work in reverse. So how do we move past it? How do we move past that plateau? Well, in this growth phase of your business that we're talking about, we are in the phase where your business is expanding. Your impact is expanding, your team is growing, sales, maybe locations, product line. There is some expansion going on. And in that phase, we're going to get you back to growth, increasing your team performance so that you can accomplish the results that you set out to. And to do that, you're going to have more people on your team who know what's going on. You can't be the single point of contact, or in an unhealthy sense, the single point of failure. You have to multiply yourself. That's one of the key traits of a new generation leader that we talk about, is how do you multiply yourself so that your team members know when they get into a situation, how would my owner handle this? And you have effectively trained them, brought them up, equipped them with the resources that they need to carry this out. But when you look at this workplace study, only 30% of employees believe they're being given opportunities to grow. I was with one of our clients yesterday, and in one conversation with one leader who oversees a division of the business, he told me no less than 4 times about different specific teams and individuals and up-and-coming leaders in their section who he is equipping to carry on his work. So we'll talk more about this and overcoming the plateau here on the New Generation Leader on IBGR. We'll be back in just a minute. And welcome back to the New Generation Leader. You're listening to IBGR, International Business Growth Radio, where we are more than just a radio station. We are a network. I'm your host, Aaron Lee, here on the New Generation Leader today. In this season, we are giving you the toolbox that you need, filling that toolbox with the tools to build a high-performing, highly functioning, successful team within your business. I am a people strategy consultant. I work with clients, organizations of all sizes, and my mission is to take them to their true potential, unlocking that people strategy, knowing that every business has launched because of a specific business strategy. But alongside every business strategy needs to be a people strategy. We know the skills that it takes to build our business. But what about ourselves? What do we know about ourselves? That's what we're going to talk about in this segment, is how we know a little bit more about ourselves and how do we know a little bit more about our teams. But before we get into that, I want to turn your attention to IBGR.network. And if you click over to the website, click that blinking question mark, feel free to hop in, ask a question, join the conversation here on the show, and we will include your question live on the show today. So jump in, and would love to have your voice as part of the show. I also want to turn your attention to the show notes. Click over to the show notes section, and all throughout this season, we're going to include the tools that you need to have in your toolbox so that you can file those away. Now, I joke that I have a face made for radio, and the beauty of the tools is that it's visual. So though you can't see me, though you can't see the tools that I'm describing, hopping over to the show notes is going to get you those tools so that you can see them, lock them away, file them away, and start using them in leading your team, your business, and yourself every day. So as we talked about in the outset, what happens when you reach a plateau? You feel like you're stuck, you're not growing, you're not declining. Well, how do we get unstuck? And we talked about this tool of maximizing team performance. How do we get to high performance expectations with our team and unlock the true potential that we have within the team? And we talked about these two. Our go-to responses are to realign. We fix the organizational structure. Maybe we reorganize the entire team. Maybe we just take out a team leader, put in a team leader. I write about in the New Generation Leader that one time that I was promoted for a grand total of 2 weeks. Yes, I am fully serious. My supervisor said, yes, you can lead this team. It was a small team, but a team nonetheless. This was early on in my career, and I thought, you know what? We are going to make a big impact. And 2 weeks later, 2 weeks, he called me back into his office and said, this isn't working. I'm not sure how 2 weeks shows you that much, but it did nonetheless. But that's how we handle alignment. That's how we try to fix these situations, is to reorganize, take someone out, put someone new in, do something structurally, and try to start executing again. But here's the thing. You'll see in the image that if you focus on those two sections, it looks like a pendulum. But truly, you'll see a number. A number 1 is at the top. If you pull back the flywheel to the foundational component of a high-performing team, you build momentum. And once you start that momentum and the flywheel is spinning, you will become unstoppable. And where does that start? It starts with communication. Communication is the foundational building block. That was the building block we talked about last week in effectively managing one-on-one conversations. How do we build relationships in the workplace for productivity and presence? So go back and listen to last week's show for tools and ways that you can bring effective one-to-one relationships. And we'll talk a little bit more about communication. I want to get back to that in the third segment today after we talk through these 5 ingredients of high performing teams. But here's what we've learned about these 5 categories. Across industries, across the world, any size organization, teams average less than 60% on this team performance metric. Now we have a multi-question assessment that we assess the team. We assess the team for where you are today and which of these 5 needs investment, needs focus. I'm going to tell you, it doesn't just start with alignment and execution. You have to have a strong foundation of clear, objective communication, strong, healthy, trusting relationships before you even get to alignment. But 58%, can you imagine an organization that's only functioning at 58% of its potential? Under that 60% mark, what would happen if you improved that? I'm going to go out on a limb and say, at the outset, we talked about that plateau, the plateau of your business and your team. That plateau is 60%. 58% is the actual average, even below 60. You are plateaued. Think about what impact it would have if your team increased its score 10, 20, 30%, up to 70 to 80 to 90. Here's where this starts to have an impact on the bottom line. And this is really important because we often look at these structural components because that's what we know, that's what we think about. That might even be what we measure. If we're measuring income, expenses, number of employees, the benefits we're paying out, sales, all of these numbers we're looking at, it's certainly easy to jump to alignment when we want to solve a problem. But let's talk about the bottom line. If we move that team from 60% to 80%, 90%, here's what changes. Employees stay longer. That means you're not training new employees, you're not losing their expertise, and you're not operating for a season while you try to fill that role with an empty seat on the team. You continue functioning at a high level by retaining employees. Second is discretionary effort. Discretionary effort is that gap between above the very basic minimum expectation that you have and the extra motivation an employee has, a personal motivation to bring their best every day. And if we can increase that, then all of a sudden our productivity increases. Everything about how we function is rising. So that discretionary effort is really important because our productivity goes up. And then you put all those together, employees are happier. And this isn't just about happiness, but if employees are more fulfilled in the workplace, that investment, that longevity takes root. And you begin to see these changes over time. It builds with time. And you start to see that number move from 58% to 65, 70, 75, 80, 90, 90 plus. Your sales go up. Your revenue increases. Your deliverables go up. Everything about your team starts to click. And no longer are you on a plateau, but you're climbing the mountain. You're climbing the mountain to the next level, ready to take on that next challenge in front of you. So here's the thing. I want to focus on these 5 categories of team performance Because what we've learned is we've learned who to involve. Too often we don't involve everybody. We just try to focus on leadership and then push those efforts down. But where I work with clients, we are focusing on everyone in the organization. So the who is no longer exclusive. The who is everyone. Everybody increases their ability to communicate. Everyone builds healthier relationships. Everyone knows their role on the team and how to bring their best. And everyone has an opportunity to grow. Remember, so few feel they have opportunities to grow. What if everyone on your team had an opportunity to grow? I know you might say, what happens if I invest in them and they leave? But the age-old saying goes, what happens if you don't invest in them and they do stay? So who to involve? Everyone. Where are we focusing? That's where we talked about skills. We don't only bring skills, we also need to have that self-awareness. Who are we? How are we wired? We'll talk about that in the next segment. But out of that comes an ability to interact more cohesively, more effectively with each other. Then what are we measuring? We're continuing to measure these 5 factors over time. We're delivering this virtually, in person, in a variety of ways to make sure that it's impacting your team. And we know why it works, because we see the improvement, and we can tie the increase in score of these 5 metrics to the business metrics that you have. So we'll talk more about self-awareness in the next segment. Well, let's take a break here on the New Generation Leader. Do you know most teams function at less than 60% of their true potential? How much does this cost your business every year? For every team within your business, it's at least $200,000 in lost revenue. How do you solve this challenge? With Invincible Teams, you can. Measuring the 5 key building blocks of high-performing teams, we immediately know where to start to take your team to its true potential. Start your free assessment today at newgenerationleader.com/IBGR. All right, we talked about the 5 key building blocks of high-performing teams around that flywheel. And as we jump into this next section, and I want to tee up what it looks like to start talking about clear communication with your team. But before we do that, I just want to invite you to jump into the conversation in our community of commerce. I hope the show today is giving you the tools that you need for your toolbox. But I also recognize we're talking people strategy today here on the New Generation Leader and all across the IBGR network. We've got great folks in marketing, in finance, in operations, in helping you build your business to the point of selling your business. So all across the network, the folks who are hosting shows throughout the day, all around the world, are jumping into conversations here in the network. And we say we're not just a radio station, we are a network. And I have already seen the great benefit of a network in working together, getting to know the other on-air talent from around the world. There are some great people who you could certainly learn from. I know I have already. And a great place to do that is to jump over to ibgr.network. Join in our community of commerce. You can jump in, ask a question, join the conversation, and be part of what's going on and build your inner circle. We'll talk about that inner circle. That's one of the key pieces of the New Generation Leader framework, helping you take your own leadership to the next level as you build your business. I think there are some great people across the network who you could learn a lot from, who can ask the right question of you at the right time and get you thinking in maybe just a little bit of a different kind of way. So let's talk about the building block of high-performing teams. We talked about our tendency to live this pendulum back and forth between alignment and execution. But when we pull back to this foundational component of clear communication. And here's what I mean by clear communication. We have objective language. When you say something, I know what you mean. Not, I think I know what you mean based on my own tendencies, but we have a clear common language that when you say something, I know what perspective you're bringing that from, what perspective you bring to the table, and exactly what you mean by that statement. One of my best examples, my favorite examples of this is, hey, how's it going today? Is not objective language, but we have a tool that you can really get through. And we'll talk about that tool later this season. Really helps you get at how are you doing? Truly, how are you doing? How is the balance of work fitting with who you are, how you're wired, and what you bring to the table? But in order to truly understand that, we have to know our own tendencies as leaders. So let's think about this a little bit. And if you jump over to the show notes, you'll be able to see this tool, the 5 voices. This is our communication framework. It's the foundational component of high-performing teams. Is we have the common language of knowing, taking emotion out of it. With a client yesterday, I had a conversation, and it was evident that there was some disconnect between 2 team members. And you know why? Because they look at the world completely differently from each other. They don't dislike each other, truly at their core. When they have a conflict, they feel like they dislike each other, but they don't truly dislike each other. They simply bring diametrically opposed perspectives to the world. So let's talk about this. There are a few different ways we can describe these differences. One is the loudness of each voice. Some of us are quick to speak up, and I'm not talking about volume of somebody being loud or quiet. I mean, if you sit down in a group conversation, is your tendency to speak up and offer your perspective, or do you sit back and watch? There are quieter voices, there are voices in the middle, there are louder voices. One of the tendencies is 82% of team members feel misunderstood or undervalued because they're quieter. And the loudest voices will speak over everyone else if left to our own devices. I say our own. I am part of that 18% that we can tend to speak first and over anyone else. So that's one way that we distinguish these. Another way is present or future oriented. Are you thinking about today and the here and the now? Or are you thinking about the future, the possibilities? What could be? Where could we take this in the future? What path could we take to build a brighter tomorrow? Or are you thinking about the practicalities of what's right in front of us? The people, the tasks, the goals, and what we have to accomplish today. Then there's one other difference. It's the people-oriented voices, the ones who consistently point back to relationships. Relationships are key and most important, and that's what these voices focus on. On the other side, we have systems and logic people. We're putting a framework together. We're conceptualizing a plan. We have some goals, some deadlines, some tasks to accomplish. There is some structure to what we're doing, and the structure is how we look at the world. Well, let's look at the 5 voices and begin to understand why this is so important. And here's what I love about the 5 voices. In the last hour, Brandon talked about some of the great tools that are out there, DISC and StrengthsFinder, Myers-Briggs. The 5 voices comes out of Myers-Briggs and Jungian typology research. But it's simple. I always got stuck with Myers-Briggs thinking, okay, I, E, admittedly, I still get stuck on this. What do these letters mean? Which one am I? What's the opposite? How do all of these pieces fit together? There are some shortcuts and some hacks to this, but here's one of the key things that I think is a benefit of the 5 voices is one word describes each voice. There are only 5. And in this fast-paced digital world that we live in, where we're trying to do more with less, it's far more effective for me to think about the voice of the person I'm sitting with. And it immediately comes to mind, and I know the perspective that they're bringing, and I can value and embrace that perspective. I don't have to translate it. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to give extra thought to, now, what letters represent him, or what colors represent her personality, and how do these, I don't have to translate it in the moment. It's there. It's right there. It's sticky and it's memorable. Sticky is that key component that I love. So let's talk through these 5. Number 1 is the nurture. You see that symbol if you download the show notes of the care bag, the cross of the red cross, the green cross, the black cross. Any of these aid organizations use this symbol. And that's the nurture. They are the caring, relational, people-focused, and thinking about people who are right in front of them today. So they're present-oriented, they're focused on people, and they're on the quieter end. They will celebrate you all day and your contributions, but they're not quick to speak up or celebrate their own accomplishments or what they bring to the table. Yet, they represent 43% of the world. So if we don't hear from them, we're missing out on nearly half of the world's perspective. And if we want to build a solid plan and have effective growth, we need to hear their voice. Second is the creative. You see this telescope, they're looking way out to the horizon. What's the possibility? What's the threat? Very future oriented, the most future oriented. Also very quiet, not quick to speak up, but they have the future ideas, the innovation, looking at the possibilities of what could be. Very future oriented, very vision oriented. Then you've got the guardian who's going to guard what you have accomplished, the resources that you have. They will make sure your budget and your deadlines are on task and on point all the time. Very present oriented. And when you put these two present oriented voices together, the nurturer and the guardian, you got 73% of the people are thinking about today, not about a vision for the future. And so that's an important balance, an important perspective that we need to bring into our conversation in recognizing for us who are visionary, they're not against us. They just have a different worldview. So, how can I listen to them? How can I guide them along the future growth and potential pathway that I want to build? Fourth is the connector, very future oriented, very people focused. They have a broad network, they're persuasive communicators, very passionate, and the connectors and the pioneers will speak loudest in the team environment. Again, like the creative, 9% of the population are creatives, 11% are connectors, only 7% are pioneers. The future oriented voices make up a smaller proportion of the population. So, where the connector is future and people oriented, the pioneer is future and vision oriented, building that strategic vision, results focused view of how can we win and how can we build more effectively for tomorrow. This tool is so impactful. It's so important for teams to understand each other and their communication styles, how they manage conflict, and how to bring the best out of each other. We'll unpack that more after this break. Thanks for watching the live stream of the New Generation Leader on IBGR today. We'll be back with the last segment in just a minute. And go online to newgenerationleader.com/IBGR and jumpstart your team's higher performance assessment today for free. Newgenerationleader.com/IBGR. We'll be back on the show live in just a minute to wrap up today's show. And welcome back to the New Generation Leader on IBGR. We are more than just a radio station. We are a network. I'm your host, Aaron Lee, and we are wrapping up today's show on high performance expectations, how we bring the most out of our team. If this is your first time listening on IBGR, welcome. We are so glad you are part of the conversation today. If you are back for another show this week, thanks for coming back and being part of the conversation. You can join the conversation on our website at ibgr.network and also on all of your favorite social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at IBGR Network. Join the conversation, see what's going on across the network, and see how you can take your business to the next level. We are about profit radio, how we can increase your profit at every stage of your business. This is an incredible network. I hope you will seize the opportunity to listen in. We've got some great shows coming up later this afternoon and every day of the week, all across the world. Last week, the normal show that comes on in the next hour wasn't on, and I listened in. And there was a great show that filled that slot last week from India. You know, it's so incredible to listen into a business leader from the other side of the world, to listen into their perspective, to let their perspective stretch your thinking, take you to a different level, give you something new to think about that maybe you haven't thought about before. That's one of the great things about this IBGR network and all of the hosts from around the world. And really, as we come back from our last segment and wrap up the show, that's really the key behind communication as a building block, is how do I tap into a perspective that's not mine? This is a key part of the New Generation Leader framework on so many different levels. The 5 voices are just one metric by which we can understand the world and understand our own perspective on the world. Geography is another great perspective. You know, the world is so different. Every corner of the earth brings a different perspective to our realities and how we shape and face the world. One of the business leaders I was talking to yesterday, one of our clients, this is a young man from Turkey, and his worldview and his perspective is different than mine. Our passions are similar. Our drive is similar. Our voices are even similar. We're both future oriented, but simply because he is from a different place geographically, he brings a unique perspective. So all of this, the generation, what generation you grew up in, all of this plays into how we see the world. And that's part of the New Generation Leader framework, is that there are so many different perspectives. How do we tap into that and not just default to thinking that we ourselves are the only right answer? So I want to press into this a little bit as we wrap up the show today over the next few minutes in thinking about, how do you unpack the potential of your team? How do you take your team's performance to a higher level? Even if we're in one of the majority voices, maybe you're a nurturer or a guardian and you think, well, I see the world similarly to nearly 3/4 of the population. But really, when we press in even more, yes, there are similarities, but our tendencies are so different. Some of you on the other end of the spectrum are pioneering, visioneering. I see a path forward. I'm ready to go take this project on. I can see how we get there. Let's go. Let's win today. I want to blaze this trail. The challenge for pioneers in this visioneering perspective is that 93% of the world don't see the world like we do. At its best, so we can communicate effectively with about 50% of the population. But in reality, most of us are far less than that. So with clear communication, a common language, and a toolkit that's simple and sticky and scalable, we can take this to the next level. We can take our team and unlock what may be hidden if we're being accidental about it. But when we get intentional, we can unlock that true potential. So here's the three pieces that I focus on with teams and with clients. And I want you to think about these three components as you build towards a high-performing team. Number one is assess. How do you assess where you are as a team, your success right now? How do you measure that? What is success? Is it simply sales and revenue focused? How many customers you have? You measure that. And I have to imagine if you're a business owner, you are measuring that. No matter what industry you're in, there are some key measurements that everybody focuses on. So if you measure those external forces and you hold value to that, how do you assess and measure your internal components? How do you measure your team? How do you measure yourself? The key first step for me when I'm working with a team is I want to know where we are with our people strategy. Let's assess the individuals and the team and get a benchmark. We need to know where we are. We need to know where we need to focus. We need to know what it is exactly that we need to work on in order to build towards the future. So we're going to assess. And I just walked you through the 5 voices in the last segment. And that is the key component of how we assess individuals. It's not so much a measurement as it is a communication, a conflict, a problem-solving tool that helps us get that common language. But we need to know where we're coming from as individuals. Then we'll get a numerical metric, quantitative data on where we are as a team. And where we are as a team comes from these 5 components of high-performing teams: communication, relationships, alignment, execution, and capacity. That's what gives us that score. We talked earlier that most teams score less than 60% on this measurement. So then what? So we've assessed the team. Now what do we do? And as I talk about every week here on the show, we are giving you the tools to build your toolkit. We have a toolkit of, I think, 60, 65 different tools. I will get in a conversation with somebody and jokingly say, yeah, we pretty much have a tool for everything. And the conversation goes on and they say, let me talk about this problem that I'm having. Maybe it's a disagreement, maybe it's a conflict. And I say, well, hey, does this tool fit that situation? Does it help you think about it in a different way? All of these are graphical, sticky images that I love drawing on a whiteboard. Give me a whiteboard and I will teach you something new all day long. I'll just draw pictures all day long. That's what I love about the toolkit is I can draw it on a whiteboard. I can sketch it on the back of a napkin. And not only do I draw the picture and teach that tool to you, but it's simple enough, it's sticky enough. And one of my friends said this. He said, you drew out the support challenge matrix for me last week. I didn't write it down, but I watched you draw it on the board. And this is the key. He didn't even write it down, but he watched me do it. He went home and he shared that tool and drew it out for his wife. That's the simplicity. That's the stickiness that truly makes an impact with that toolkit. And then here's the process. The process comes in. That's great. We have a toolkit, but what do we use? When do we use that tool in that way? Based on the assessment, we know what's weaker, what areas we need to focus in on, and how we can build for the future. We'll work through the process with individual leaders, making sure they have growth opportunities. We'll work with your leadership team to make sure you're high performing. We'll work with every team in the organization to make sure they're high performing. And that is our sequence. Assess, use a simple, scalable, sticky toolkit, and work through the process. This clear language, a clear standard, a common language that nobody forgets will improve the organization. So those are the ingredients. Those are the building blocks of a high-performing organization, how you can impart high-performing expectations across your business and make sure you're getting to the next level. I hope that's helpful. Don't forget to drop on by ibgr.network, download the show notes, add these tools to your toolkit to make sure that you are building your toolbox throughout this season. Well, an incredible show today. Thanks so much for listening in. Thanks for being part of our conversation here today. I'm glad that you are investing in yourself by being part of this IBGR community. Up next today, tune in to Team Up and Thrive with Dr. Tracy Hines Lashley. And then next week, join us back here on the New Generation Leader as we talk about building influence with your customers. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching the New Generation Leader on IBGR. Go to newgenerationleader.com/IBGR, download the show notes, jump into the conversation, start assessing your team, and take your team to its true potential. Thanks for watching. Join us next week as we talk about building influence with your customers. Have a great afternoon, and thanks for watching.